Hello, everybody, and welcome to Our World Today, the Unionist perspective. Today, we're looking at a few topics that have stood out to us over this last couple of weeks that we also believe are quite significant in just unpacking what is happening in the world today and what perspective we can apply to it through the lens of unionism. So I'm going to open it up to the team and invite you guys to start off with the topic that you felt was most topical, and we can take it from there.
I think it's funny when you say topic that was most topical.
You're
I've never heard someone use that way, except you.
welcome.
The topic that was most topical from our whole week, or maybe for the past 10 days, is probably an update on Russia. It's been a while since we've had one really big update. And it started when the Wagner group, led by Prigozhin, marched upon Moscow and was ready to launch, I guess, a coup against Putin and his government, and stopped and went back. And I guess it started a conversation and a questioning about probably how Russians feel about the situation, what was Prigozhin's strategy, but it also shed a light on how the international scene is handling this situation, basically. And I guess we're uncovering with the latest news how much the West is doing behind the scene, which we kind of knew, but obviously we're not in on big government secrets. So, but the fact that the CIA made a claim to just attack Russia, and it had the resources to attack Russia, probably, it's just telling about what the situation is really about today. And so there is a lot to unpack, and maybe we could start with the feeling of the situation. How does it feel? I guess, and we could start with the beginning. Why, in your opinion, did Prigozhin launch an attack on Moscow? How it played out?
Yeah, it feels like basically he found discontent, and there was discontent in the Russian military, not enough to where they would actively aid him in performing a coup, but enough discontent to where they wouldn't stop him, basically, which is really, it's not a surprise because of how the Russian war in Ukraine has been going. But it really shows how thin the loyalty to Putin is, because it's not based on anything substantial or stable. It's just based on basically a spoils system and the dream of rising higher to the top. And the closer you get to Putin, supposedly the more kickbacks and bonuses and nice things you get. And so he basically runs his country like a 13th century Mongol warlord, just pillage and plunder. And those who are most loyal to me, they get the best stuff that we take, basically. And so that's Putin in a nutshell. But Prigozhin found this vulnerability where obviously people are this guy is not being logical in how he's conducting this war. He's not doing a good job at the aims that he proposes to have. And so Russia's like suffering in this war against like Ukraine, which is like this much smaller, less wealthy country, of course supported by the West, but still. So people are mad about that. And yeah, he was just taking advantage of that. And so, but as Jeff was mentioning in his discussions with us, Putin probably, used his like security agency to like threaten Prigozhin's family or something, because it's weird that Prigozhin backed off from the coup, because he probably would have succeeded, or at least done some damage and been able to negotiate something. And so, yeah, it's a strange move. And some people are even saying that it's weird that it's like unlikely that President Lukashenko of Belarus like came in and intervened to create a deal between Putin and Prigozhin, because Lukashenko is very, very much like the minor player in the relationship. And it seems weird that Putin would allow Lukashenko the bragging rights of saying, oh, I just saved Russia from civil war. And Lukashenko is actually saying that in Belarus. He's literally on state TV. He broadcasts like an hour+ long rambling session of him, like embellishing on like, oh, I saved Russia from civil war. I'm such a hero. And I actually told Putin it's better not to kill Prigozhin, and it was me, you guys. And I'm like, so why would Putin allow that from Lukashenko? Because Lukashenko isn't just a pawn of Putin. He kind of like plays both sides. Like he's wanted some ties with the West, but he also wants Russia's money at the same time. And he's been playing the back and forth. So it's like a really like weird situation. And I have more to say too about like Prigozhin and the messages he's been sending. But I just wanted you guys to react to that and feel what you feel about all that, because it feels really like weird, but also like predictable, because like these cracks have been forming in Russia for a long time. So yeah, that's it.
I would just like to add some context. We're saying that it feels like Russia is, and it feels like a bubble. Kind of feels like the Truman Show, in a sense. I don't know why, but like Belarus and the way they speak and the way they show on TV and the way the situation is crazy. But everyone inside is acting like it is normal. Like we were also having this discussion in the chat where basically Russian people said were feeling like pretending that it is normal. And I think we knew there would be a cost in terms of number of lives lost for Russia from pretty early on. Like historians were expecting that to happen based on how Ukraine didn't fall in 24 hours basically. And also they were mentioning how there was trauma for Russia and anyone in the USSR, basically, because they've seen war so much, even in like recent years and decades, that they just don't want to lose their life and upend their life again. So maybe instead of like feeling like they're paralyzed with fear, they're trying to say that it's normal and they're numbed out by the situation, even though they pretty much live in a bubble that is just about ready to burst or blow. And that's probably why, because everyone is living in that kind of bubble, plus everything that's been happening, the censorship and all this drama around the government and everything, I think, yeah, they're not really prepared to see how their economy is failing, for example. We've seen that industries were closing just because we've seen that the air pollution was like lesser in the past year, which is pretty surprising way to realize that your economy is like dying, or one country's economy is dying. They're taking a hit, obviously, financially from like all the sanctions that are coming and will keep coming. And then the West is pretty much through with Russia's game. It's been through for like a decade, really, but it's ready to act, and it's probably not going to end well for people. But I can understand. I don't really understand, but I can see how, from a perspective of having lived through trauma, you just want to live a normal life, and you're just saying like, hey, Putin, do your thing as long as I can live my life, you know? But that's not what's going to happen. Obviously, like the choices of the whole country and the karma of people is going to catch up at some point. And I also wanted to add that in context, but there's really this feeling that there's this weird Truman Show just happening before our eyes. And it's just feeling like it's embellished, but also not real, a little bit ridiculous. And yeah, that's it.
I definitely have to agree with you that there's a sense of it being unreal on a level. And that's probably from the perspective of being removed from it. So I suppose if you are in the heart of it, it becomes more real. And with that becoming more real, there would be a desire to grasp onto a construct of what is normal. And for some people, what is normal is to avoid the confrontation, is to avoid the conflict, is to soothe the wound that they don't want to open. And through healing, we understand that the wound needs to be open in order for the healing to happen. Well, it's literally you cut yourself. You kind of have to sanitize that wound in some way, or use some type of antiseptic or antibacterial or whatever. You kind of need to apply medicine to the wound. So the sense of not wanting to engage in something that surfaces the trauma only serves to kind of keep people stuck more than encouraging their healing. And I feel like that's what's happening here. So none of this is new from the perspective that it's never existed in one form or another. I think what is new is the level of outward aggression that's being displayed through this war and through the dynamics in those countries and through the quasi-coup that wasn't really supported, but that both sides will probably claim some level of victory over, that the Belarusian, president or prime minister would claim some level of victory over. So you kind of have all these pawns on a chessboard that think they are kings or kingmakers and thinking that they're making power moves on this chessboard. But if you know anything about the game of chess, there's always a lot of strategy involved, and we're starting to hear the strategy of the more powerful players that hasn't actually really been publicized, and rightly so. Rightly so. You don't necessarily use your power moves up front. You kind of keep them in your pocket to ensure that when the time comes to strike, that you are in a powerful position. And so there's a lot, it's just something that Jeff said and shared in the chat was the powerful players in the background, very few powerful players that are pulling strings or have a game plan that is not commonly shared. And amongst the people who know the game plan, they would also not commonly share it. And I think that's kind of the thing around maneuverability. You kind of need to keep your game plan, but you also need to remain agile enough to execute your game plan when the time is right. And so for the play of sanctions, it's kind of kept Russia in check to an extent. It's kept Putin's military forces in check to an extent. Because there is a level of bigger retaliation than just sanctions. So there had to be strategic plays to say, whoa, you're playing with fire, you're going to burn your fingers. But just so that you understand that the fire is real, here's a little bit of burn. So it's kind of been that kind of gamification of this wartime picture. And I think it's always going to be that way. The other thing is you have the Belarusian, I don't know, what is he, president or prime minister?
He's the president, but
okay. who's also going, oh, well, I can take a little bit here and I can take a little bit there and I can appear to be everybody's friend, because at the end of the day, we understand a very primary concept that probably gets subscribed to by a lot of people, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So depending on who's being the enemy at any given time, I need to be on the side of their enemy too. And this is why they are flitting between positions. And again, unfortunately, if you stand for nothing, you are going to be like a leaf blowing in the wind. So that's really what almost characterizes their politics at the moment, is this blowing in the wind behavior. You have some other players like China backing Russia. You have players like South Africa choosing to say that they are non-engaging and would rather have the diplomacy of trying to broker peace. What you actually have is some people very firmly standing against an issue, while some people very firmly benefiting from an issue unbeknownst to everybody. So everybody's got some level of card in their pocket that they're not quite putting on the table. It's literally a game of poker.
I have to agree with that, yeah. Oh, it was like, while you were talking, I was thinking that it's all a game of like what it appears to be a deception. And I think Putin hasn't really well estimated the power of the West. It's just that the West is like democratic, so it's not going to wage war right away, but it still has a lot of resources and strategic moves under its belt. And I wanted to say something else. It was about Russia and appearances too. Yeah, I think the appearance of normalcy in Russia in everyday life is it's just poker too. Like, people are trying to play the game of like, hey, everything is normal and we can live off of that. And it's a gamble. And we'll see if it works or not. And I think I wanted to say something else, but it was basically to say that I agree with this illustration of just like the gamification of something. But there's it's geopolitics basically. It's always a game, and at some level with very real things at stake, and everyone having an agenda, good or bad. But yeah, and sometimes agenda appears to be neutral, like profit, for example, for Belarus or South Africa or China, you know, wanting to just make a little bit of money, not respect the game. But we're just seeing how, contrary to like regular poker, you cannot play a hand always, or even in poker, I guess, there is a sense that at some point you're going to end up empty-ended. And if you're addicted to gambling, or if you're just seeing the profit and the possibility of profit and being very greedy about it, you're not going to see the risk of losing everything anymore. And I think that's what's happening. There are countries, I guess to some extent, like all countries have their own emotional and political intelligence about what the situation is with Russia and China. And sometimes by trying to find profit in what they feel is good, they make a bad deal. And sometimes in that bad deal, they say, oh, we made a bad deal, and they get out of it. They get the hell out of it. Sometimes they stay because we're like, oh, it's not going to fall, or it's going to fall later, so I can still profit from it, you know, gamble again. And sometimes we're just in it way down and just saying like, we're just going to profit because the system works. Not seeing that it's actually a gamble, and so in every gamble there's an end game. And yeah, that's just it. I really like this illustration because it makes us take a new perspective on how our systems work and how the world works. And I think sometimes countries see benefits in like instant gratification, short-term profit, without realizing that there are very real consequences. We do not live in a bubble. We still have life, and there are very real consequences to the different spiritual choices that we make. And there are things to learn, obviously, like it's like when you make a sale, or basically when you learn to play a game of chess or poker. You play, you fail, you learn. Sometimes you play a lot, you fail a lot, and then you learn. And I guess we're all learning to do that to some extent.
Yeah, and you know, and I think one of the things that we need to remember about a game like poker, since we're using the analogy, is that out of a deck of cards or a couple of decks of cards, there are a number of winning combinations that can come up in any way. But the fact of the matter is you have to have stakes in the game in order to participate in the game. And I think that that's what we need to remember, is that for all of these countries and all of their people, there are stakes in the game. And in some of these instances, the skin in the game is so much higher. The stakes are so much higher. The potential for loss and damage is so much higher. But at any given time, they are never not in the game. Once they start off, they're kind of in it until the end. And with a game like poker, you may have levels at which people win, but there's always an ultimate winner. There's always the person that takes away the biggest pot or the biggest prize or the biggest winnings. And so you start to see how the toll on the human being that's attached to a country that's part of this type of game just starts to be higher. And so you can understand why there may be people that, while they know that there is potential loss here, they also want to try and avoid that potential loss at sometimes very dire costs.
Yeah. I do think there's one way out, though, and it would be knowing that there's a system of God where everyone wins. And I think all countries are searching for that system again to some extent. Probably achieving parts of that system in very small ways, but there's still like a world system that is prevalent here. And once we learn that we actually don't have to participate in the gamble because there's another way, it would be much simpler. But there's also the other side of the coin where obviously it's very important to defend our values, and it's very much leading us to the kingdom of God anyway, to reaffirm that we stand for democratic beliefs, very modern, where society, freedom, and not very ancient gangster warlord type of governments. So yeah, there are just these two things coexisting. And I think really all of it leads to the system of God, but there's probably going to be a huge descent, I guess, for some countries to actually learn their lesson. But again, we'll have to see.
Yeah, and I think sometimes that learning does unfortunately come through the contrast. That learning is going to come through the contrast of not peace. That learning is going to come through the contrast of a slowing or declining or failing economy, so that people are on a level almost forced to make new choices. And I think sometimes that is the learning as well. The learning is to choose not to learn through the contrast. So there's layers to the learning under these circumstances. And it's fortunate to be able to identify that there are layers to the learning and there are multiple lessons at play at any given time. And the choice to make the healthiest or to learn the healthiest lesson fastest, so that other lessons that require a little bit more energy have the required energy when those lessons need to be learned.
Feels like a nice moment to kind of transition to, I guess, another kind of lesson that we've been learning mostly over in the US, because last week there were some important decisions from the Supreme Court that were taken. And I wonder if like Isaiah and Sage would like to walk us through what happened this week and kind of unpack the situation there.
Yeah, so there were a few, there were even more than the ones that I have on the tip of my tongue, but I think it gives us plenty to talk about. I feel like the biggest ones were, so first of all, there was one decision that said universities can't use race as a factor in their admissions. And that's kind of like when you have like two candidates for admissions who have like equivalent qualifications, you can make a decision based on diversity. And that's what affirmative action was saying with the universities, is that they could do that in order to uphold their value of diversity and decreasing social inequality. But that ruling said that you can't use it anymore. And so it kind of like leaves universities with like, it's kind of weird, like the decision said like people could mention in their application, like in their essays, like they could say, oh, I've experienced discrimination or this or that type of thing because of my race or ethnicity. And I've learned these lessons from it and this kind of thing. This was mentioned in the majority opinion that could be used. So, you know, it kind of makes it like I'm not really sure what the full impact is going to be, but most of the media that leans left in the US is saying like, this is terrible. This is a disaster for social equality, you know, and affirmative action is like gutted. That's the word that they're using. So I don't know, there's that. And then there's another one, this web designer in Colorado was suing preemptively, although there's some confusion of whether she had actual potential clients who were gay or if she was suing preemptively. But she was saying like, I want the right to refuse service to gay couples. If I'm making a wedding website for a couple, I don't want to serve gay couples. And the Supreme Court majority was saying, yeah, you're right. You don't have to, because this is creative expression and the government can't force you to creatively express in a way that you disagree with. So, but now again, like the liberal media is saying, okay, this means anyone can discriminate against LGBTQ people and refuse to serve them, right? And so there's that too. So that was another one. And then I can't remember, what was the third one that I posted? I can't remember it right now, but there's those two, and those are pretty meaty if you guys want to start chewing.
I think I think we can start chewing on them.
Yeah.
We can get a lot out of this too, for a start.
Yeah.
There is something about, I wonder what's the truth there. There's
know.
something about, as a non-US citizen, who in my country, it's like basically forbidden to classify people out of their ethnic groups. So it should, lead to neutrality and equality of chances. And so I wonder if the two decisions weren't made from this lifelong argument of equality of chances, like true equality. But over the years, I've come to get used to affirmative action and civic equity in all of this. And I think in theory, yes, we need to practice neutrality and equality of chances. In terms of like pragmatic action, there is really this thing about like two profiles that are just the same, exactly equal. The only difference is that one is from a major ethnic group and one is from a minority or something. And we need to choose out of their race, and do we want to promote diversity? In reality, there's still discrimination in entry from like class and wealth and not even just ethnic groups, And so I'm wondering, and I think it's showing in the second decision, I'm wondering if, in search of that excellent, perfect neutrality of all people, like we aren't opening up to, I guess, more discrimination. But there's just something there's just something there that I can quite figure out just yet. So yeah, I'm curious to see what you guys have to say. If the Lakrunda has a lot to say on the way his mouth is said.
No, you know what? I have to agree with you. Like, I'm trying to feel into it, and I can't quite pinpoint it. I've like, you know, like it feels. It almost feels intrusive, but not intrusive. And I'm trying to, and the thing that perplexes me is does it fly in the face of our desire for equity or inclusion or equality or cohesion in society or any one of those things? Because I feel like and maybe my question stems from this. So with a decision like that from the Supreme Court, does that now impact, well, it literally, does that impact the law across the country, or is there still this opportunity for various states to enact their own laws in relation to this?
It's it's across the country. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a decision that's quite pervasive, because
Mhm.
it could spill over into very many instances of, let's speak to the service component. There could be very many instances of refusal to give service to LGBTQ people. So does that now spill over into not allowing LGBTQ plus people into restaurants, for instance?
See, that's the part where I felt like the outrage machine that focuses on left-leaning people was overreaching, because this decision was only saying, like, you can't compel somebody to create some creative expression that goes against their values or beliefs. So I was like, that's what I was saying earlier to you guys. I was like, that's not the same as saying, like, oh, we don't serve LGBTQ people here at this restaurant or at this retail store. You know, like, if it's somebody like making a wedding website for people, then they have the right to say, I won't make it for like this group of people now. I
Well,
don't know.
I kind of have to agree with you on a level in that, but I'm also looking at it from the opposite perspective of, if you're not going to do this kind of thing for me with love, I really don't want you to do it anyway, you know?
Right.
And
That's what, yeah. Why would you go to them anyway? Just go somewhere else where they'll love you.
Yes,
exactly.
put
You
a
know,
boundary.
and I think that's probably one of the things that's perplexing us is this thing about, does this decision feel based in love? And like at the core of it, it kind of feels like it's niggling at the concept of love, but like, you know, like it's like a little pinch, and you kind of have to wonder, does that little pinch almost virally become something else, or is it going to kind of stick to that spirit of that decision? And unfortunately, we have seen that these things kind of grow arms and legs, and then, you know, the nail wags the leg that wags the dog, and the dog doesn't even know in which direction it's going any longer. You know, so we kind of have to still be cognizant that the ripple effect could be very many uncomfortable things, even if it doesn't go to the extent of, oh, well, it's spilling over into people not being served in restaurants and stuff like that. Because that would be an extreme example. But the problem is that these things happen so surreptitiously. They're like very, like, you know, like little pinpricks over time become a whole, which
Mhm.
might become the thing that actually eventually allows the tree to fall over.
Yeah, I know. It's just like,
Yeah.
It feels weird to me though, to like legally compel someone to be like, you have to make this wedding cake. If a gay couple comes to you, you better make that cake, even if you hate them. Like, make it look beautiful, but just, I don't care how hateful you are, but make them this beautiful cake. You must do it.
Yeah.
To me, it seems like that seems like control. That's like being like, you have to love me. And I don't, that's not how I'm being in my life. If someone's mean to me, I'm not like, you must love me,
That's exactly the thing that I was feeling.
I
And I
don't
feel
know.
like love obviously is not a concept, but there is this thing about the confusion of the role of justice and the spiritual choice. And I think some Americans, I think that's the fear of the liberal left side of the political spectrum, is that mostly on the right side, they're just taking what is legal and oftentimes making it into a spiritual choice and spiritual value when it's not. And so from a justice level, it doesn't seem to make any sense to try to force someone to serve someone in this type of service. And I know, but the thing is, like, it's still for that person, obviously, it's a service for a wedding, so it's something of value. You would want to go to someone that really loves you to give you that value. But out in the world, it still feels like obviously it's led by non-acceptance of the LGBTQ community. If you were to compare that to servicing people in a restaurant, yeah. But in a restaurant, you're not making a wedding cake based on like LGBT love. You're just serving someone food. And so legal justice is probably not going to say something about that in that sense. And I think that like the decision, preemptive decision wasn't really pervasive. I don't know. Not like, no, you're not obligated, but it didn't give any justice judiciary direction to that person. It's just, no, you're not obligated. On the other end, like a company, even if it's in the form of a college and that responds to like making our future employees and intellectual minds of tomorrow, forcing them to not have affirmative action, that seems a little bit more implicated, And again, I don't know if it's because the society is changing, like affirmative action was made to kind of reverse the effects of so many decades of segregation, maybe we don't need it anymore, but I don't know. In my experience, it feels a little bit raw still. I would say, like, in my own experience, I got given the chance to take an anonymous exam to enter into like the equivalent of MIT in France. But like, it was anonymous. Everyone got a chance. I got in, but I guess the program that helped me to be there was made so that people like island girls and guys like me who didn't think that they could enter except if they had like a wealthy family or a really big thought of like good deeds that they did before they were 18. They couldn't like go into these types of colleges, and so the program was made to like say, hey, you actually got a chance and to kind of remove the veneer of like it's just for a certain type of the population. And when they removed the exam and said that it was only it would only give entry and permission on file and grades again, and oral admission, which they didn't do before. And then it felt like, and the promos that were there after me were more and more white, I guess, Caucasian. And so it's like, well, it was a decision, and it was not affirmative action, it was not on race, but there was this equity made so that people would know, just the knowledge that they could enter changed everything. Because we moved that, it just made it that much harder for kids from all social classes to just enter, And so I can't help but wonder, what if, like, for example, affirmative action was not used in the sense of, oh, we're just going to use to accept like one Black guy and one Asian girl for that class, and we have our quota. And colleges were actively trying to say, hey, like, there's a chance for everybody. And this was removed. And I think that's a valid questioning. And maybe that's why we don't have the answer yet. And maybe that's why these decisions feel like, I don't know. Feels like legally it's okay, But what if, but it's more like the application of this decision that feels wrong rather than the decision itself. So yeah, but the Supreme Court hasn't been the best at upkeeping the values that the majority of the population was really desiring in this past few years. So even though the legal action wasn't really that bad, we know there's going to be no follow-up afterwards about how this is going to impact everybody. So I think that's mostly where the battling and the fear comes from, even for services rendered to the LGBTQ plus community. I think it's like, all right, the legal decision was made, but what is going to happen to me afterwards? And of course, like, you make your own decision, you make a spiritual choice, like, you have the experiences that you have. But I think it's still a valid, solid reason for questioning what the hell is the Supreme Court thinking? Like, was this decision really built on something solid? And I think people just don't want their stability and rights to be shaken up, because, I don't know, civil rights was not that far ago, not that, it's pretty recent is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know how you guys feel about that.
So the one thing that you spoke to that I think is probably quite important is obviously the longer term impact. And like, for instance, with the website, the creative designer, I kind of feel like the decision of the Supreme Court just echoes a spiritual law, in the sense that we have free will, and so our free will, even the angels won't interact, won't act on our behalf because of our free will unless we ask, kind of thing. And so I feel like that on a level that kind of echoes, that decision echoes a spiritual sentiment that it probably doesn't sit so well, because we don't really have a sense of what the longer term impact will be. But then when it comes to something like affirmative action in the choice of candidates to enter study programs and things like that, I kind of feel like it speaks again to something that we discussed a few weeks ago when we had our major discussion around what was happening with LGBTQ, with the sense of rights being under attack, and the confusion within LGBTQ people that seems to be spilling out into all these little movements and this noise related to LGBTQ rights. And now I have to wonder if this affirmative action decision isn't also starting to spill over as a result of confusion from people of color who have in the past said, I don't want the job because of the color of my skin, kind of thing, you know, because we all want something based on merit. And I have been exactly one of those people that have said, I want it on merit. I want it because I deserve it. I don't want the door opened because I am a person of color, but I want my rights. And so what message are we giving to the universe? And what is that boxing match happening that's saying, well, do you want it? Don't you want it? What's going on here? You know? And it would be very similar for any one of us as an individual dealing with another individual who can't actually make up their minds. You know? And so you have to wonder what level of confusion we are sowing into our reality through some of the things we say that we know inadvertently starts, and it's not even inadvertently, we might inadvertently say it, but we know that it very advertently, in a very real way, has an impact on our reality.
Yeah, it's like, it's interesting. I don't know. I feel like the other thing I was feeling too was like, I feel like affirmative action also exists because people like in the United States, in the world in general, a lot of people have like inbuilt you know, prejudices, and they have reactions against people based on their ethnicity or their race or other aspects of their identity. So it exists to kind of counterbalance that and counteract that. And because in the absence of a real spiritual way to work through that for all parties involved, this is kind of like an external mechanism to check those prejudices, right? I also felt that. And so that's why I don't feel as good about that decision as the wedding webpage designer one, because I'm like, well, I feel like this does help, but I guess it's something that we all have to heal, and everyone needs to claim their deservingness and their place. And a big thing in reading people's experiences about this was exactly what Granville said about, including Clarence Thomas, who's a justice in the Supreme Court. He's a Black man, and he said in his own opinion that he was harassed and just demeaned because people would be like, oh, you just got into this legal program because you were a diversity pick, you know? And he was like, I do not want that for people. Right. And so I'm like, yeah, I understand that. But like, just because someone says that, it doesn't mean that it's true. But it is something that people of color have had to reckon with and face in our country. You know what I mean? So I don't know.
Yeah, I think like we're expressing the confusion that is happening. And obviously we do have to heal that too inside of us. It feels like it's an unresolved thing for now. I don't understand his opinion. I see the other side of it as well, because like in college, I got in on merit, but the values inside the college didn't change from they always talked about meritocracy, but there was always this class thing and money thing happening behind the tables and under the tables. But it was, I did get in, but there wasn't love or a real place made for me inside. And so I know this is a very precise example, but it's almost like by giving me my pick, I also learned a big lesson about, hey, you also need to choose. It's kind of like when you go job hunting. Sometimes you get desperate if you haven't had a job for so long and you say, I'll take anything. But it's also important to realize that as much as the employer is interviewing you, you're also interviewing them to see if you're a kind of good fit. And if you aren't loved there, then it means that you're not a good fit or that there's something to heal. And I guess Clarence Thomas is by his name. I guess is opening this new paveway. I guess is making a paveway for us, a pathway for us. In terms of like, we're entering the time where it's time to heal through this energy of not deserving something, not being good enough, instead of relying all the time on external actions. And I think some colleges are still going to promote diversity, maybe, but in a different way. And we're just going to provide the solution that, hey, you need to claim your deservingness, and that's not because you got in on more social equity that you're going to have it easy inside, or that people are going to recognize you for it. So there's something about, like, Jeff always says to me, and I guess that applies to a lot of people of color, nobody would do it for you. And it's not that people of color are not hard workers, far from that, but there's something about, you need to make your own way in the world and realize that you are part of the world. It's time, And it's almost like the universe or God is saying, all right, it's time to grow up. It's time to take flight, and you're supported there. And so when you see this in that sense, it brings much more peace to the situation than seeing it from an external point of view. And it won't be easy, but there is an opportunity, so many opportunities to heal there. And so, yeah, maybe we need to see that as an opportunity instead of like a thing of removing our rights, going back decades, because I don't think we're going back decades here. Even though on the external it would seem like, oh my gosh, our rights are under attack, oh my God, So yeah, I think to be continued, maybe, but there's definitely something there about like, there's a new opportunity, a new way as just hope, and that's the thing with justice. Sometimes it's weird, but it also leads to these new openings that we couldn't see. So, question mark.
And on that question mark, thank you everybody for today's conversation, to everybody that's followed us. If you haven't already, please also feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous content. And we look forward to seeing you, all of you, next week for another conversation in our world today, the Unionist perspective. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.